Okay, so let's dive into something that's been talked about a lot, really sensitive stuff. The case involving Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez.
Hmm.
Chances are you've definitely seen headlines, probably heard some strong opinions flying around.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those cases that just, captured massive public attention, sparked a ton of debate.
For sure. And for this deep dive, we're going to do something really, really specific. Our source material today comes from excerpts of a YouTube video transcript. The title is Shocking New Evidence Proves Megan Thee Stallion Framed Tory Lanez.
Right.
And just to note, this deep dive is a production of Hood Hope Movement.
So our mission really is just to impartially unpack the specific claims, the evidence that are presented within this one source.
Right.
We're not bringing in anything else from the outside.
Nope.
We're not taking sides on the case itself. We are laser focused on understanding the narrative this source is putting forward about the conviction and the evidence. Well, as the source creator describes it.
Exactly. Think of it like we're dissecting one specific argument, one perspective that's out there in the public domain. We're just going to walk through the points this source makes.
Hmm.
Look at the evidence this source uses to back those points up and, understand the case it tries to build. It's really about understanding the source's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to keep acknowledging this is a sensitive topic, lots of debate around it.
Yeah, it's a good chance to see how one specific narrative gets constructed, right?
Wow.
Using selected bits of information from what was obviously a very complex case. Let's just look at the basis of this source's argument.
Okay. So this source, it jumps right in. It questions whether Megan was even shot initially.
Mhm.
It focuses on her first interactions with the police, at least as they're shown in the video.
Right. The source points to this moment caught on video where, according to their transcript, Megan's asked about her injury,
Mhm.
and she apparently says, glass, shot. I didn't get shot. And the officer, again, in the source's clip, is quoted confirming, oh, you didn't. The source then immediately contrasts that with her later claim that she was shot.
And the source uses some other video clips to try and support this early point. It shows video of Megan getting out of the car. You can
Yeah.
supposedly hear and see her stepping on broken glass.
Yeah.
And it claims an officer even audibly notes the glass, too.
And the source connects that moment with her first glass statement. It argues the shows, quote, how it came up to begin with, sort of implying the glass was the initial focus, maybe the cause of the injury, based on those very early comments as presented by the source anyway.
Okay, so moving on from those first moments,
Mm-hmm.
the source then pivots. It starts pointing out what it calls inconsistencies, or even lies, in Megan's later accounts. Again, this is all based on how these accounts are presented in the source video.
Mm-hmm.
First up, it takes on her claim that the hospital interaction was, quote, so rude.
Yeah, the source shows a bit of footage here. It claims this footage is from the hospital interaction. Now, what's interesting is how they present it. They sort of imply it contradicts the rude claim, but the transcript doesn't actually spell out how it contradicts it. It kind of leaves it to you, the viewer, to watch the footage and decide if it matches the quote. That's kind of how the source builds that particular point.
That's a really key observation,
Mhm.
actually, how the source constructs its case. Sometimes it just presents clips or quotes and then nudges you toward the conclusion it wants you to draw rather than, laying out the full logical steps.
Exactly.
Okay, next. The source tackles Megan's claim that she tried to keep the whole situation private at first.
Yes, and the source flat out calls this a lie. It does this by showing a specific social media post. It states that 3 days after the incident, Megan took to Instagram to post this message here on the left about being shot.
Right.
So the source uses that post as direct evidence, within its own narrative, to push back against that privacy claim.
And the source lays out a timeline to kind of build on this argument about how public things became. It says, a day after the incident, contact with authorities. A week later, some vague public statements. Then what the source calls the infamous live stream.
Mm-hmm.
And then a whole month after that, Tory Lanez finally speaks out, gives his side. The source uses this timeline to really emphasize that Tory was, quote, quiet this entire time until after Megan's live stream, kind of contrasting their alleged public approaches.
Another statement the source flags as a potential lie comes from that Gayle King interview with Megan. The source quotes her as saying, I never put my hands on anybody. I never raised my voice too loud.
Okay, and this is where the source brings in a totally different angle. It starts talking about eyewitness claims and alleged physical evidence that suggests maybe there was a fight between Megan and Kelsey Harris.
Right. The source states Kelsey had open wounds and cuts on her legs that were actively bleeding. And at the same time, it claims no injuries were reported on Tory Lanez. So the source presents this comparison of the alleged injuries to draw a very specific conclusion within its narrative. It says, quote, "The fight was between the women." It uses the claimed lack of injury on Tory and the presence of injuries on Kelsey again, as the source presents it to shift the focus of the conflict onto Megan and Kelsey.
Okay, right. Now here's where the source seems to really dig in, focusing its energy. It brings in the testimony of Sean Kelly, who they identify as a neighbor, an eyewitness.
Yeah.
The source spends a lot of time on excerpts from Kelly's testimony, at least as presented in the video. It claims Kelly testified he saw two girls fighting.
This is absolutely central to the counter-narrative this source is building. It gives specific quotes from Kelly's cross-examination as they present it. One key bit quoted is, question asks, "Did you state, sir, that the shorter gentleman didn't come out of the car until the initial shot fireworks had started?" And Kelly's quoted answer is, yes. The source actually repeats this question about the initial shots starting while the shorter gentleman was in the car, and Kelly is again quoted saying yes. So the source uses this exchange to strongly suggest Tory wasn't involved right when the first shots happen.
And what about the fight? The source quotes Kelly again. Question. And did you state that initially you saw the two girls fighting? Kelly's quoted answer. I did. Yes. And then another question. Did you state that after you saw the two girls fighting, you saw one of the girls shoot? And Kelly's quoted answer there is, I believe so.
Yeah, the source makes a point of highlighting that an objection from Megan's lawyer was overruled right then. And then it quotes the question being repeated to Kelly, whether he stated that the shorter guy got involved at that point trying to take the gun away.
And the answer?
Kelly's quoted answer. Yeah. Now, the source interprets this final answer, within its presentation to conclude that, quote, "The witness is saying Tory tried to take the gun away," framing Tory's involvement not as the aggressor, but as someone trying to de-escalate or disarm.
Okay, but the source doesn't stop with just courtroom testimony quotes from Kelly, right? It includes more audio, it claims, is Sean Kelly describing the sequence of events.
That's right. This additional audio, as the source presents it, describes a girl getting out of the rear passenger side, going up to the front passenger side, opening the door, screaming, yelling at someone in the car.
And in this extra audio,
Kelly is quoted describing them starting to fight. He says something like, one girl is kicking from inside the car, the other is fighting outside. He says, the two girls, yeah, I can see one feet coming out trying to kick her and the other one's fighting, and then the passenger gets out. He apparently explicitly clarifies the fight is between the two girls, quoting him as saying, they start fighting here.
And this seems crucial in this additional audio clip from the source. Kelly is quoted asking, where's the shorter black guy? And the answer supposedly given is, he's in the back. He's in the back of the car.
Yes. And right after that, Kelly is quoted stating, then the gun and the girl shoots. So she and the girl shoots. He's quoted describing seeing, quote, what appears to be the girl standing here and going in, shooting into the car. The source uses this audio clip to really hammer home its specific interpretation of Kelly's testimony.
Which is?
That a woman was the shooter and Tory was in the back of the car, at least initially, maybe only getting involved later to try and grab the gun.
Okay, so based purely on the excerpts and audio clips presented to the source, Sean Kelly's account, as framed by the source, becomes absolutely central to its argument. It's two women fighting, a woman shooting into the car, Tory Lanez in the back at first, maybe intervening later.
And then the source makes another big claim. It says this specific interpretation of Kelly's testimony is, quote, perfectly corroborated by both security guards in this situation. It mentions sworn statements from Tory Lanez's bodyguard and also, interestingly, Kelsey Harris's bodyguard, who was hired for the trial.
And what did they allegedly say, according to the source?
Well, the source specifically presents a, quote, attributed to Kelsey's bodyguard. This guard supposedly overheard Kelsey saying things like, how can I not tell on myself and how am I protected if I tell certain things?
Okay.
And the source interprets this, again, within its narrative as suggesting, quote, a lot more clear why she wanted immunity. The implication being maybe her own statements or actions needed some kind of protection.
So the source pulls together these security guard statements as it presents them, adds its interpretation of Kelly's testimony, and basically claims they all, quote, paint a consistent picture. Two women were fighting. A woman fired the gun. Tory tried to de-escalate the situation.
Exactly. That's the core alternative sequence of events the source is trying to establish using the evidence it has selected to show you.
All right, now let's shift to how the source handles Kelsey Harris's own testimony. The source describes it as, inconsistent, to say the least.
Yeah, it really focuses on that. The source highlights that Kelsey allegedly initially told prosecutors that she witnessed the shooting, but later recanted on the stand, admitting that she lied under pressure.
Okay.
It notes she pled the Fifth Amendment, points out contradictions, which apparently forced the prosecution to bring in her prior statements, and the source uses that to argue those statements were unreliable.
So the source's conclusion on Kelsey.
Basically, that her credibility was compromised, raising reasonable doubt. That's the takeaway the source pushes.
And does it provide quotes from her testimony to back this up? As presented in the video, I mean.
It does. It includes excerpts from her cross-examination shown in the video. For instance, when asked if she saw what happened during the shooting, she's quoted saying, again, no. The way I was positioned, honestly, no. She's also quoted saying, I said things to protect myself that night. And when pressed about her earlier statements versus her later claim that it's all a blur and she didn't see or hear anything, she's quoted admitting, again, our interview was not 100% truthful.
Wow.
And when asked directly who shot Megan, the quote provided is, again, I was getting out of the car. All I heard was shots I did not actually see. So the source uses these specific quotes to really underline its point about her alleged inconsistency, her lack of direct witnessing, as presented in these chosen excerpts.
Okay, so moving away from witness testimony now. The source pivots again, this time to forensic evidence, specifically about whether Tory Lanez even touched the firearm.
Right. This is another really key piece of evidence the source leans on heavily to challenge what it presents as the prosecution's narrative. The source states that a forensic expert testified that, quote, 90% of DNA on the weapon belonged to an unknown male, not Tory Lanez.
90%? Wow.
That's the figure they give. It also claims his DNA wasn't found on the magazine, and it raises questions about the DNA software used, saying it had, quote, documented instability and potential for false matches based on testimony presented in the source.
The source also asserts that an expert testified something like, if Tory had fired the gun 5 times, his DNA would be expected on the weapon, but it wasn't found.
Exactly. And it also mentions that female DNA was found on the gun. And then it claims that while Kelsey tested positive for GSR, that's gunshot residue.
Right, the particles released when a gun fires.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While Kelsey tested positive for GSR, her DNA was allegedly never tested again on the gun. That's another point the source makes.
And the source really emphasizes the amount of Tory Lanez's DNA allegedly found on the firearm, right?
It does. It states it was only 0.01%. And it uses this analogy, likening it to finding a single blade of glass from a football field to really underscore how incredibly tiny, how trace that amount allegedly was. So the source argues, this tiny amount, plus no DNA on the magazine, plus 90% unknown male DNA on the gun, it says this directly contradicts the idea that he fired the gun repeatedly.
The source also goes back to that claim, the one that was reported a lot publicly, that Tory screamed, dance, before shooting.
Right.
It asserts this source's evidence shows this was a lie as well. How?
It states that both Sean Kelly and Kelsey testified that they did not hear Tory make that statement. So the source uses this point to specifically challenge a very well-known detail of what it presents as the prosecution's story.
Okay. Finally, the source gets into the medical reports, again, as presented in the source video, and it talks about claimed inconsistencies regarding Megan's injuries and also how evidence was handled.
Yes. It references Megan's statement about doctors finding bullet fragments. But then, as presented in the source, it questions her, saying she thought the doctors were the police. And it points out that, according to the source, none of these doctors were called in to testify in court.
And it details what these doctors allegedly reported based on the source's presentation.
It does. It gives descriptions from 3 doctors as shown in the video. First, Dr. Anthony Lafredo. He allegedly described the injury as a laceration from broken glass. The source emphasizes no mention of gunshot wounds, fragments, or ballistic trauma, and described Megan as pleasant and no acute distress.
Okay, one doctor. Who else?
Then Dr. Milton Little. According to the source, he allegedly diagnosed bilateral gunshot wounds based on imaging, removed 3 small fragments, called the wounds superficial, but, quote, performed surgery anyway. The source claims he testified the fragments were bagged and given to police.
And the third.
Dr. Anna Howell, described as a plastic surgeon by the source. She allegedly described the wounds as superficial and cleanly closed, noted x-rays showed no fractures, minimal residual shrapnel, treated for cellulitis infection, and discharged Megan with no mention of ballistic trauma.
So the source presents these 3 accounts.
Right. And it highlights that out of these accounts, as it presents them, only one said gunshot. It uses this to suggest there was inconsistency in the medical findings that were presented.
And this leads into the source's point about missing fragments and problems with the chain of custody, right?
Exactly. The source claims that at preliminary hearings, detectives stated bullet fragments were missing. But then later on, prosecutors later claimed that the LAPD had them.
So a direct contradiction, according to the source.
The source frames it that way, yeah. As a significant inconsistency suggesting possible evidence mismanagement or miscommunication, it specifically asks, well, if the LAPD did have the fragments, as prosecutors allegedly claimed later, why would the lead investigator, who the source names earlier as Detective Ryan Stagner, testify in this manner at the preliminary hearing, saying they were missing?
So the source's conclusion on this point in his presentation
Is basically that this inconsistency casts doubt on the integrity and the completeness of the evidence. It highlights what it calls a clear error in the chain of custody.
which is the documented trail of evidence handling, crucial in court cases.
Absolutely. Maintaining that chain is vital to ensure evidence isn't tampered with, so raising questions about it, as this source does, can be legally significant in terms of arguing doubt.
Okay. The source mentions a couple of other small things, like Tory Lane is expressing concern, some other claimed medical inconsistencies by Megan, before it sort of wraps up its presentation of the alleged evidence. So if we step back now, what we've done in this deep dive is really focus intently on one specific source, these excerpts from that YouTube video transcript.
Yeah.
And we looked at the particular narrative that source constructs about the Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez case.
Yeah. And based only on the transcript and the video excerpts this source chose to show and emphasize, its core claim is pretty clear that Tory Lanez's conviction is questionable.
Right.
It builds that argument by pointing to, well, a whole series of alleged inconsistencies in testimony, particularly Megan's initial statements and Kelsey's later ones, again, as presented by the source.
And it relies really heavily on its framing of the witness testimony, especially from Sean Kelly and those security guards, as shown in the video, to build up this alternative picture. The picture where two women were fighting, a woman fired the gun, and Tory was maybe just trying to intervene.
And the source weaves in those specific findings about DNA and GSR on the weapon as it interprets them, plus the claimed inconsistencies in the medical reports as detailed in the source. And those questions it raises about the chain of custody for the bullet fragments,
Right.
all used to further support its argument for reasonable doubt.
So the source's overall conclusion, again, we have to stress, based only on the specific points it's selected and framed, is that all of this adds up to reasonable doubt. That Tory Lanez was convicted based on what it calls a flawed as well as incomplete narrative.
Yeah, it strongly implies that the evidence, as presented within this specific source, actually points to a very different sequence of events than the one accepted by the court.
And this deep dive, it was really about exploring that one specific perspective put forward in that one specific source.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how a narrative that challenges a legal outcome can be constructed.
Exactly. By selectively highlighting certain bits of evidence, framing inconsistencies in a particular way, and presenting very specific interpretations of testimony and forensic findings, as that source creator chose to do.
Precisely. So for you listening, being well-informed isn't just about knowing the headlines or the final verdict. It's also about understanding the different bases on which conflicting narratives get built publicly.
Yeah.
By examining the specific information presented within those sources, like we did today, without bringing in our own outside context, without taking sides.
And this exercise really highlights how different sources can pick and choose, frame, and present information to build a very specific, very persuasive argument, especially in these really complex, highly contested public cases like this one.
Definitely. So here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Based only on the specific details and the alleged inconsistencies presented in this source we just unpacked. Think about the changing accounts it highlighted, the eyewitness testimony it described, the forensic findings it mentioned, those medical reports it detailed, and the questions it raised about the chain of custody. What does exploring this specific source highlight for you about the challenge of determining reasonable doubt when conflicting information from specific sources is presented and framed in a particular way?
Yeah. How does evaluating information solely based on the points raised within just one source, like this one, shape your understanding of what kinds of arguments can be made about reasonable doubt in a legal context, even if you ultimately don't agree with the source's final conclusion? Something to think about.